So Nicolas Nigli is the Deputy Secretary General of the Canton of Genève, and we have invited him to join us on the panel because in an attempt to outnumber the audience. But no, frankly, the reason is that we have panelists coming from all over the world with great experiences. They will tell you about it, but not all of them are directly related to Geneva. And the panel is called Geneva Solutions, so it's good to have you here, Mr. Nigli. And so Geneva Solutions, why this title? And it's a project. I'm a journalist and I have worked for several media, most recently Le Monde in Paris, and now I'm here back in Geneva to create a new media called Heidi.News. And one of the section of the media will be Geneva Solutions, because Geneva is a city where people work for the rest of the world. They try to solve problems for others. I mean, you have great cities around the world, and but in this one, that's quite special. You have people in the World Health Organization trying to solve disease in Africa, or you have people at the Meteo organization working about droughts in Africa and other places. So many people in Geneva are in solution business. Maybe that's not always clear, and maybe not called solutions. It's maybe called Geneva International, or it's called UN, or it's called NGO. It has many names, but at the end of the day, these people are looking for solutions. And I think it's a great way to reunite people around this idea of solution. And I will start to introduce each panelist. Maybe I start with you, Ruta. You have been saving lives, and you have worked for organizations that have saved lives everywhere, in Iran, in Congo, in Asia, etc. And now you are creating Phablets. So how can you justify that you create Phablets instead of saving lives?
That's a really good question. I think there's a lot of misconceptions about. I think there's a lot of misconceptions about what saving lives actually means. I've been working with conflict and displacement for the last 8 or 9 years, and there's a perception that what people need after a conflict is food, water, and shelter. And in the first 6 months, it's absolutely true. You do need food, water, and shelter. But after that, it's worth asking yourself a question. How long do people stay displaced? Think about it. Think about the number that's in your head right now. On average, it's 18 years. That's about half of my life. I don't want to spend 18 years getting food delivered to my door, getting water delivered to my door, having a shelter to which I owe somebody else. Over the course of 18 years, I want to build a life for myself and for my community. That's what most refugees, that's what most internally displaced people want to do as well. But they often don't have the tools to do it. And we as humanitarians, honestly, we're not great at providing those tools. So why I'm working for Phablets, or why I'm working with Terre des Hommes for Phablets, is because Phablets are a way of giving people a possibility of finding their own solution, rather than us giving it to them.
Okay, great. And what role can Geneva play in this new approach?
Honestly, we count on Geneva innovators. I'm learning from you guys all the time.
But you're based in Lausanne right now with Terre des Hommes.
Terre des Hommes is based in Lausanne.
And Mr. Nigli, how do you feel about it? I mean, this humanitarian task that Geneva has, I mean, saving lives. You have several organizations here, of which it's the main mission, like UNHCR, like ICRC, etc. Now trying to give people the means to help themselves, basically. Is that part of the Geneva mission?
You can always give people a fish, or you can teach them how to fish. The best way, I guess, is certainly for people to be able to help themselves. It's empowerment. It essentially engineers a self-worth, self-pride process in people, which is incredibly valuable. At the end of the day, I think what we really need to do is to create more bridges when it comes to local and in the field. I think it's very much about a collective effort, but the more we essentially empower people at the end of the chain, if I can call it that way, the better. But again, it really is about connecting, typically saving lives. And I'm sure we will hear more about this. If we only have the sort of the traditional humanitarian approach, perhaps we will find less interesting solutions than if we have more sort of skill sets and expertises around the table. And this is really where we need to step up in terms of intra-organization work, but also intra-teams with more skills around the table.
All right, and I think nobody here will disagree with Ruta. I don't know what you think about, but in every of your keynotes that I have gone through, there is an idea of, I don't know, for you it's like open source development. In your speech, Fabio, it's more commons, creating commons. And you, Ines, it's about creating bridges. So it's all like soft skills applying to humanitarian and development. Is that right? I mean, would you like to maybe bring the microphone? Shannon, would you elaborate on this? How can you save lives with open source softwares?
So I'm from New Orleans, which is in a region that is rapidly feeling the day-to-day effects of climate change, not just large scale when we have big hurricanes like Katrina and Harvey and Irma and Maria that have kind of come across our region in the last, well, mostly several years, but Katrina back in 2005. And we're thinking about how we can address these on a day-to-day scale. There needs to be a broader awareness that comes to the public, and that's one of the first things that we have to tackle. And the way that I work on this, I run an organization called Public Lab, a very small nonprofit that has a much larger open source community that works around the world. But we think about strategies and methods for people to not just use technology to answer their questions, but for how to facilitate conversations in their very localized neighborhoods, so that when there's a storm event, a regular afternoon storm, and your streets are flooding, you have people that you can come together with to talk about the problem and to think about your own solutions.
Okay. You, Ines?
We are one of the humanitarian hackathon organizers in this region, closely collaborating with CERN and other IOs and NGOs here from Geneva. And what we see is that there is a gap between innovation and technology on one side and the humanitarian needs on the other side. And this bridge is actually what we want to close as best as possible. And this is why we really live in this Geneva area, and this is really well that we sit here, because we have access to over 250 NGOs from the humanitarian world in this region. Our neighbors are field workers for the ICRC and other organizations. So while chatting with them and understanding their day-to-day needs, how they can actually help people and not just delivering food to the front door, but empowering them to find their own solutions, we get the ideas and challenges that we tackle in our humanitarian hackathons. And I think this is important, that we bring together people not only from the Geneva ecosystem, but way beyond that, to really address these needs and find proper solutions. And they don't have to be brilliant or sexy or blinking or shiny. They have to work in this context.
Give us an example. What can you develop between science and humanitarian needs?
So we thought,
I think you have one next to you.
Yes, I come to that. so one of the first hackathons in 2014, we had an idea which came out of a discussion with people who worked for the Red Cross. And they said, well, you know, it would be nice to think about if, for example, technology from CERN that is used for cooling of the detectors, if this could be somehow used also in the humanitarian world, for example, to build an inflatable fridge. And so we said, well, inflatable fridge sounds great. I mean, Geneva in summertime would be nice to sit in Jardin Botanique to have an inflatable fridge. But maybe it's even more than that we can use the technology for. And so we assembled a team which was very diverse. We had an architect on board, we had an entrepreneur on board, and many, many more flavors to say, okay, can we use an existing technology, change it in that way that is used for the humanitarian world or can be adapted? So the team around the challenge, they looked into the idea of what actually needs cooling. And obviously it's medication, vaccination, that's true. Then we have food and beverage, yes. But then a third topic came up and it was, well, after natural catastrophes, you have bodies that need to be cooled in order to allow visual identification of the person and to give back the body to their loved ones. So the question here is, you say, well, there is a DNA test and you do a DNA test and then you will find the right match. But actually, in most of the cases, like in over 80% of the cases, identification is done visually. So if you can preserve the dead body for a bit longer, you allow the people, the forensic team, for example, from the Red Cross, that they can identify this person and return him back to the families. And this is why the team came up, and now I come to this monster here. Maybe you can hold this for a second. The team came up with a new way of body bags. So it turned out that the usual customized body bags are not having seen innovation in the past decades. So the team took one of the conventional ones and tried to understand how they can improve it. So you see here, this is a prototype that got developed during the first hackathon, which basically has an airtight zip. You can remove the air outside and you can vacuumize the body inside. It's watertight, so no liquids can drop out. In case of Ebola, for example, you do not want that body liquids are passing out of this. And this is basically a prototype that the team developed during 60 hours here in Geneva, and it was then presented to the Red Cross, and they were extremely interested in this new way of thinking that now the team is working closely with them. They got a huge funding from the Humanitarian Innovation Fund, and they now have produced over 500 of those prototype body bags that are currently field tested in Thailand. And basically with this new innovation, you can preserve a body at least 3 to 5 days longer than usual.
Okay, thank you very much. It's very impressive. It seems very comfortable. Yes. Yes. Yeah. There might be a second one, but not so happily. Okay. So 500 already produced, and who has financed the test?
The tests were financed by the Humanitarian Innovation Fund. The team got a huge grant, 150,000 British pounds for that, and the Red Cross is basically a supervisor of this project, gives ideas. There are regular meetings ongoing where the latest developments are discussed and the product is developed further and further.
So the financement, the funds came from Britain?
Yes.
So it's part of the Geneva solutions to have local ideas financed by other people. That's part of the know-how here. Okay, great. Maybe you, Fabio, you speak about creating commons, and you have created a game to breathe, right?
Yes, that's right. So I must say I'm a bit stressed, and I'm becoming aware about my breathing, and I feel that's what we want to do with our games. So we are building games with different peoples, So we have professionals, we have developers, we have game designers, artists. But the goal of the initiative we have is really to bring people together to collectively create technology that can be used and that can be adapted by everyone. So the idea is we started with games for children who have cystic fibrosis, who have to do a breathing therapy 1 hour daily to release the mucus in their lungs. After that, we developed some educational games for children and young adults who have asthma. The idea is to go towards games for health promotion. Encouraging people to become aware about their breathing, encouraging people to think that 90% of the population is breathing overpolluted air, that 2 people in 10 has a chronic respiratory disease. And I think we cannot solve this problem if we go with corporate solutions. So we have to bring people together and create innovation that can be freely adapted. So no copyright and no patents. So that's the idea.
And so who is creating the games and who is using the games?
The way we are working, so we are a small initiative. We started in Montreal and Geneva. We are now in other countries. And we organize events, so game jams that are 2 for 4 days long. And the idea is that we bring maybe 20, 30 people together to create these games. So we try to always have a mix of different kind of knowledge and skills so that we also build on the collective intelligence. Yeah, that's how we.
That's for creation of the game, but then who is using it?
So now we have some tests ongoing in hospitals. So we are testing some games for asthma with children in Montreal, for example. We are starting to test some games for cystic fibrosis in Paris with young adults from 16 to 24. And we are willing to develop that in Geneva too. So test it with clinicians and with people affected to see if they are really impacting the health and how the user experience is, because health is generally quite boring and moralistic. So I think game is a good way to make it more fun and attractive. So to create adhesion towards the time.
And what is the role of Geneva in the whole process?
Breathing games, like I'm coming from near Lausanne. So
that's accepted, don't worry.
But we were hosted in the LIFT conference and in the Open Geneva conference. So we got also some funding from Genevan Foundation. Yeah. And we thought it's good if we build an association here. So that's how we rooted in Geneva. And I think there are really important links to the international organizations and possibly to other really interesting projects with whom we could build claims.
Do you see other fields where gaming could be useful? I mean, breathing is of course, a vital function of the body, but do you see other fields where gaming could change something, could be a game changer?
Yeah, it reminds me of a psychiatrist who says play is like the air. You don't notice it until you don't have it. And I think play is very important to learn. So children learn like social skill by playing. And we really have to think a bit more about how can we make collaboration more playful and how can we bring people together in a way where we feel really connected to who we are, where we dare to be who we are. And I think play can be a field of experience where we say, okay, for a moment, let's dream something else, let's live in another place, and let's try to be maybe another person. So I think that can be adapted to a lot of places.
Okay, thank you very much. All what you do is great and fantastic and innovative. I think there is still like the old school of humanitarian and development who will tell you, okay, that's nice, but we have done a great job before, and do we really need Fab Labs or open source or commons like this to continue our work? I mean, how do you assess it? I mean, the old school attitude that could maybe slow you down or not grant you the the energy you need. Shannon.
Sure. So I personally do not consider myself having worked in the humanitarian space, but I can pull from some of my experience and why and how we started Public Lab. So we were working in New Orleans around oil and gas refining issues. So the Gulf Coast region has a number of about 17 major refining companies, and using community monitoring technology to enable people to do their own grab samples, because we had a regulatory gap with our Environmental Protection Agency or our state agencies not being able to come out and take air samples when they were most needed. And we, from that point, started working on the BP oil spill, which happened in 2010 when the Deepwater Horizon rig exploded and caused, I think it was the largest oil spill, at least in US history. And what ended up happening was that the event ended up being controlled by a massive corporation, their contractors, and then the United States Coastal Guard, US, that's what they're called. So we had our whole assortment of kind of power players that were putting the mandates down for how we were going to experience as the population of the Gulf Coast this massive disaster. And one of the first things they did was they put a flight cap over the Gulf of Mexico so good pictures could not be taken of the extent of the damage. So my organization, and we were a very loose kind of group at that time. It was, me and some students from Tulane and students from elsewhere and fisher people from the Gulf Coast region started thinking about what's the solution to us not being able to get good imagery and understand what's literally happening in our backyard that we can smell and we can potentially feel the health effects of, but we can't see visually. So we started launching community satellites on balloons and kites and really putting that curiosity and the play back into this massively serious thing that was happening to our coastal communities. And in that way, we built tools and kind of analog methodologies that gave us a very, very different perspective of what the spill was looking like versus what BP was releasing. And I think what this kind of exploration through making and through open source designing and through creating DIY type tools allows is to counter the narratives that come from our most powerful institutions. In the United States, for instance, the self-regulation of massive industrial facilities, research tools that are created at a price point only for governments and academic institutions. So we really try to think about how can we create things that are accessible not only because of their price point, but also because of the technical specificity under which they're used. And in doing so, figure out ways that we can build stronger communities through very simple and applied technology methodology.
Okay. Now, when I meant humanitarian, I mean I include solving problems. This is all about, and actually you are in the solving problem industry, right?
Yes, I solve problems.
Okay.
Or I try to.
Ruta, I mean, you say, of course, it makes sense that you want to learn to teach people how to help themselves instead of just delivering food and so and so. But do you have like a track record of Fab Labs helping that? I mean, have you a number of people who have gone through the Fab Labs you create and who have make a better life?
So I think I'm gonna kind of really briefly answer your first question first,
okay.
and then go to the
go
second
ahead.
question. So when it comes to the relationship between old and new humanitarian approaches, old humanitarian approaches are still really well suited to some things, to many things. So an inflow of Rohingya into Cox's Bazar, absolutely use the approaches that are currently existing. But the old approaches aren't enough by themselves. And you can see it in two ways. On the top-down way, there's what Geneva International is always talking about, which is that you have a massive, massive underfunding of humanitarian interventions, and donors can't keep pace to fund. In the bottom up, if you take a look at almost any refugee camp, you see an entire side economy. So you see Somalis and Congolese and a whole bunch of other people setting up side businesses and doing things independently. And every once in a while, you wonder whether you can't leverage these side businesses and what people are already doing to reduce the cost and the burden on the international community. After all, people want to do the other stuff anyway. They're doing it. Can't we help them make it grow? So that's the reason why I think that new approaches are necessary. They don't replace, they just support. And then when it comes to things working, like TDH's Fab Labs have been going for about a year now, or our pilot Fab Lab's been going for about a year. Our aims in that Fab Lab were really narrow. All we wanted to do was show that youth were interested, that vulnerable youth coming from Syria, coming from Afghanistan, were interested in coming to a place with a 3D printer. I don't know how to use a 3D printer, so why would they want to? We proved it. We were getting about 30 visits a day. But in addition to that, we were having lots of side benefits. So we had people whose education had been cut off in Syria, who couldn't enroll in schools in Greece, who were able to keep learning to maintain their dreams. Like one guy wanted to be a car designer through the Fab Labs. There is a woman who basically she came to the Fab Labs because her kids wanted to play. But she started using the sewing machine and next to it, the digital embroidery machine. There's not that many people with digital embroidery skills. She got a job. She mentored other people. They're getting jobs too. So we've only done this. It's a very, very new thing, the Fab Labs. But even the very new things are showing promise.
Thank you. I think technology and innovation is often disruptive, and that's the reason why some countries like Iran, I think you have worked in Iran, are trying to like slow down the internet or to control technology. What you said, Shannon, about BP, and you managed to show the real extent of the oil spill, BP was not willing to show. So it shows that it's a counterpower somehow, and the Fab Labs also like. Teach people to resist and to so don't you think there is a limit to your approach, which is a political will or not to go further? I mean, how can you do a Fab Lab in a country where internet is restricted, for example?
I think first things first, I think part of the problem is that people in refugee and displacement contexts don't have much space to create their own solutions as it is. Like, they don't have, well, the resources and tools that they have, they're using. You can see it. One of the first questions is whether you can give people a step to advocate for themselves, basically. So right now, for instance, Somalis in Dadaab, they have a certain number of things.
That's a big camp in Kenya, right?
That's a huge camp in Kenya. It's the biggest
of the world.
Yeah. Would I personally put a Fab Lab in Dadaab? No, I wouldn't. I think it's way too early. Having said that, if you were to do that, you would take all these little Somali businesses that are operational, that are helping to support families, that are helping people to find their own solutions, and you would go from level here to level here. That means that people would have the ability as well to advocate for themselves and to also change the political dynamic. Are we doing it directly? No. But by giving people space to talk, to collaborate, and to exchange with other Fab Labs, because there's over 1,200 in the world, we're giving them the capacity to do more. And it's beyond just the making.
Thank you very much. Ines, we see here great ideas and actually innovation in both examples we had. But you are from the CERN. CERN is very innovative. It's even one of the most advanced research center in the world. Do you see yourself, the humanitarian and development world as in the community as innovative or slightly conservative?
So what I can just say from my point of view here, especially in the Geneva region, and talking to humanitarian organizations in this region, I sometimes have the impression that innovation as such is more seen as a hobby, and it's cool and fancy to have it in the portfolio on the website. But maybe I'm wrong with that, and I'm stepping on many toes right here. But maybe I have not met the right people.
We'll have questions from the audience afterwards. So.
But what I definitely see in the humanitarian and in the international organizational world is when you have someone who would like to bring, for example, the body bags and the innovation in the body bags further, they need funding. And especially in the social entrepreneur business, this is really difficult because you have just a limited number of products that you could sell. Take again the body bags as example. Let's imagine the Red Cross needs something like 500,000 body bags per year. There is no way, at least no ethical way, to raise the capacity or to sell more body bags. I mean, the only possible way to create a business would that try to let people die, which is a thing that we maybe want to avoid. So you have someone who says, I'm really interested in bringing this innovation forward, and I really see the need and that it could help a small community of people, maybe after a natural catastrophe or any other products that our teams have developed so far. And when they then present back to the international organizations and the NGOs, they say, well, it's a nice tool and we would definitely be interested in using it at some stage, but it needs to be adapted and so on. So the team says, okay, but we are doing this on our private capacities, meaning the teams that are coming to our hackathons, they work on this for 60 hours and they present a product, but they have their normal day-to-day jobs. So in many cases, we have entrepreneurs in the team who say, this is really a great idea and I really would like to advance it, but their private capacity of resources is limited. And when you have someone in a humanitarian innovation business having maybe a permanent contract, having a good portfolio of resources, they don't mind if this body bag will come to the market in 5 months or in 5 years. But the person who's really behind it, who really invests a lot of their free time, their resources and so on, they cannot do this forever. I mean, at some stage they have also to pay their bills, simple as that. And I think there is a huge gap, especially in the humanitarian innovation or the social entrepreneurship, where more funding is needed. And I'm looking at Nicholas.
That's why we invited you on stage.
No, because I think this is really important to find more social entrepreneurs and to inspire them really to work in this business, because there is a need and there are products that need to be developed. And as I said earlier, it's not that a sexy product is needed or something that you could sell on Amazon in capacity of millions or gazillions, but there is really someone who is a beneficiary who really would like to rely on this product, and even if you just have one, it would help. So I think this is something that we have to keep in mind by that.
Yeah, thank you. Now, Geneva is the capital of many things. It's the capital. It used to be the capital of the banking secrecy. It used to be the capital. It is still the capital of human rights and I mean the right of the law, the war. It's the capital of the oil trading, and now it could be the capital of the body bag 2.0 something. You know.
That would be awesome, yes.
No. In one of the first reportage we are preparing for the new media ID News, we are proving that Geneva is also the capital of toilets. I mean, toilet industry is entering a new revolution, and this revolution is like mastermind in Geneva. But you will discover that online once we will come online. Fabio, you also seem to lack some. I mean, would you say that you are in an environment where innovation is welcomed and well funded, or would you wish like more means to support what you're doing?
No, I think for our project it was a bit a lot of energy to put to get the funding we wanted. We got funded through research funds, so that was some files to do and a lot of processes, but that was enabling us to advance. And we got some funding from foundations, And yeah, I think it's not so easy to get support, and I feel that the more money we can raise, the easiest it is, which is not really, it's encouraging in a way, but not to start new projects. And I think, as you said, Geneva is the capital of banking also, so maybe we could also think about ways to transform the socioeconomic system. There are initiatives in Switzerland, for example, to propose that the Swiss National Bank creates a virtual account for every citizen that could be used to distribute innovation funds to projects that the people want. So it wouldn't be money we would get, but we could just allocate money we pay through the taxes to projects that people create. So I think there are ways to fund projects differently. I think also if we check the research funds, we could imagine a system where the funds would be collaborative, where researchers wouldn't need to compete to get funding, but they would need to collaborate, to build together, to create innovation that is in open access. And I think that would boost the capacity of innovation for Geneva and for the places.
Mr. Nigli, I think now we need to hear you. Yes, no, not for the money, because you are the government and you try to spend the money carefully, which I perfectly understand. But there is a lot of money in this city, maybe not in the hands of the government, but many private individuals and companies. How do you see a way to make innovation, as we hear it, not a hobby, not a nice little thing, but something that would be a real engine for you, I mean, for Geneva?
Thank you so much, and thanks for the calls. I hear you. Before getting into this, maybe just getting back to what happens in the refugee
Bring your
camps.
microphone closer to you.
Yeah. Just before getting into the Geneva response and what we could do better, and giving you some examples of what we develop. Just getting back to the refugee camps and to the Fab Labs and the innovation centers we can create in places where clearly people have very little. I think we should be very humble about our belief that we necessarily do everything better here than on the field. I think many great innovations come precisely from these camps, from these innovation spaces in townships or in these refugee camps. The human inventivity is absolutely amazing, and in my opinion, in the years to come, if we invest more in these spaces, I hope very much there will be innovations which will spread across the world and touch all of us much more. It hasn't to be some sort of a north-south way, if I can speak that way, all the opposite. I think we have an enormous amount to learn, or perhaps to relearn from the rest of the world, especially when it comes to sustainability and doing things differently. Now Geneva, and how can we essentially get better at funding and connecting? I think there are two distinctive points here. First of all, one of the projects we are really investing on is bridging between finance and SDG implementation here in Geneva. We have this global governance and NGO community, very vibrant. And then we have this great pool of wealth. There have been funds created around rehabilitating, investing in post-conflict areas. A peace fund has been launched just, I think, last year. And we have now started a process where we, for the first time last year, have put together the two communities, SDG implementation, UN, international organizations, innovators in sort of global affairs, and the financial people, to learn from each other, to start a dialogue, and to see how we can move further. This has now led to working groups being established on how to push blended finance, impact financing, and we very much hope that this will lead to very, very concrete projects. I'm not the best place to talk about that. We have obviously supported this very much, but it's Ecosystem 2030, which has been leading the charge here with Sustainable Finance Geneva, also being absolutely critical in moving this forward. We very much are involved. Also with the work done by this new secretariat called Financial Centers for Sustainability, which very interestingly brings together different financial centers. They don't only sort of compete with each other, but start to cooperate. Very interesting. Last but not least, I think we really need to change the way we organize in the different organizations we are working with. And I think you have addressed this a bit, and you have asked the question, you know, the old world sort of like facing the new one. I think change management is absolutely fundamental. We need on the one side to facilitate the decision-making processes, probably also with the help of tech and visual analytics and big data capacity. But then we really need to work on the human side of things, because very often evidence is there that the new way works so much better, but then to implement it, you really have to have help to transform the way the organizations do work.
Yeah, there is a bunch of people here who work on humanitarian emergencies, and these people are not always the most innovative. If you take ICRC, for example, it took them decades to understand that other people than Swiss nationals can also help, I mean, work for them. It took them also decades to understand that you don't always need like a big four-wheel drive to move into a city where you have good streets. They started buying Toyota Corolla long after they only bought Land Cruisers. And then they understood that maybe they can use less diesel and oil when they operate. So it takes them a long time, because they always think it's an emergency, I have to save, I have to visit prisons, I have to do that and that, I'm in the middle of a war, so I don't have time to think about the environment or the innovation. Is it something you face, like the short-term emergencies and things, and then you seem to think long-term, but is there a conflict here, and is it a mentality gap?
Honestly, it's a super interesting question. There's often a difference between there's often a difference between fields and headquarters. Honestly, on the field level, people have so many surprises that they're constantly engaging in little innovations. As you were saying, little unnoticed innovations that don't get the headlines and the flash and the bling. Institutionally, it's hard to scale these innovations up. There's a couple of reasons for this. And one is actually the push for accountability. It's great that the humanitarian sector is trying to be accountable, but we're trying to be accountable with paperwork as opposed to with impact. Part of the point of kind of getting people to be creative is you can't monitor absolutely everything they do. And yet, in order to get humanitarian funding for innovation, you need to register things that honestly might deter people from coming to a Fab Lab or might deter people from cooperating with each other. This is stuff that the humanitarian community has been working around already for years. So I'm taking from some of the field workarounds and trying to apply them to the Global Fab Lab initiative. But it would be really nice if big donors could help us to cut the paperwork.
All right, message is sent. Shannon, how do you see that? I mean, you are here in the capital of finance and humanitarian and development, and then you see that the innovators within these fields and the and people who look for solutions are lacking funding. How is it in the US, and how is funded your organization? I mean, you are a great country with a great president and a great system. Everything works perfectly fine. How do you see these poor Swiss guys looking for money?
I'm going to politely disagree with you on one of those points, but we won't go any farther into that. I think, honestly, the United States is in a very privileged position. So we have different funding systems that we do not have to only rely on government or research grants. There are lots of private philanthropists, families, people who have made money over a century that give their money away to basically whatever they want to. So we are in the very fortuitous position of having funding from a lot of individuals, some companies such as Google's Office of Open Source, for instance. We also do, and I'm gonna try to like weave my way back to Geneva with this comment, we also do sell our DIY open source science kits to make an earned revenue stream for Public Lab. And I wanted to go back to what you were saying about, actually both of you at this point, about the kind of sometimes unexpected innovations that come when you're not actually thinking about innovation, but because of the necessity of making something. And CERN, all right, I'm tying this all together here, bear with me. CERN was the originator of the open hardware license, if some of you may have heard about that. And because of that, and because of the innovation that CERN has done other much bigger kind of research projects like White Rabbit, we came together probably about, let's see, it would be 4 years ago now, back in 2015, and started something called the Gathering for Open Science Hardware. So it's a number of people that have kind of over the years been working within their own communities, such as Public Lab, and are thinking though about like how do we innovate tools in an open hardware context so that people can take our designs, they're publicly available, and they can go wherever they need to go. They can be modified locally. They can be changed based on locally available resources. And so this event started here at Idea Square at CERN back in 2016. And it has since gone to Santiago, Chile. It's gone to Shenzhen. And we have people from 30 to 37 countries that come every time. And it's really incredible to see the different types of innovations that come from this open model when people are thinking about applying designs in their own context.
All right, thank you. I would like now to open the questions from the audience. Is there a microphone around? Take mine. Is there a question? Yes, madam.
I'm going to run all around. It's going to be cool.
Hello, good evening to everyone. Thank you for your great work that you're doing. What I think that comes out of your work is really addressing problems, because this conference called about solutions. But I think when we come to the SDGs, we have to go beyond providing solutions out of here and look at the dimension of the human emotion and psychology, particularly when it comes to disasters or situation of catastrophe, how this is addressed. As you say, you look at the shelter, the food, and the physical need, but how much is really tackled to get these people really quickly back on track to be able to really get their life back. And I think this is something that is very missing in the way this is. And this can't go, I'm sorry, through psychology, sessions of years and all those kind of things. We have to think about more quick solutions. And I think India has some also good experience in this field because they use other dimension related, for instance, to homeopathy, because they have good experience out there that needs to be looked at, and we can't really keep on, addressing the solutions out of here and not involving the people in the solutions.
Thank you. I'm not sure it's a real question. It's more like a remark. But does any one of you want to reply, or we can go to the next question as you feel? All right. Who has another question? Yes, sir.
Really great conference and great contribution. Is there a communication deficit, and how can we solve it? All those great innovations, the body bag, it's great that Open Geneva gives us this platform to share, but how can we share beyond? Heidi News maybe, but are we missing something to share more?
Who wants to answer?
It's something I've been thinking about, at least, because for the Fab Lab initiative, what makes it different is the communication, and what makes it different is the sharing. So what I want to have happen is exactly what you were saying. People affected by conflict coming up with their own solutions that we in turn can scale. Honestly, I don't think it's a bad thing that we don't have one platform to communicate. I just think it's important that we have enough. I think a decentralized model is an interesting model because it enables actors to find each other. But if that's the model that we choose, whether by default or no, we need to make sure that everybody has access to it, that everybody can find their way into it. And it's a bit of a challenge. So it's where we as Fab Lab people need to do more work.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, Heidi News will be part of it, but decentralized, of course. Who has another question? Yes, sir?
Yes, please. So I often thought about when you talk like that there might be also a lack in some areas for people to have access to data, to relevant data to actually work with. We probably have a less problem about data in this environment right here, but we already heard that New Orleans can run into situations where people don't have the necessary data available. And so I think, are your initiatives also designed to empower people to get their own data, like through citizen science or the deployment of sensors in cities and the skills how to use them? Is that something that you're looking at?
Yes. So public labs work many times gets called citizen science. I personally, and I know this is the framing that's accepted by the United Nations, and globally this is what we call this kind of participatory monitoring work. I like to think of our work as community science. It's a science that supports our social organizing. So for instance, in New Orleans, when people need data about their communities, they can look to our Office of Resilience, but the resilience plan may not have been written with data input from a block level. And that's incredibly problematic when you're talking about not being able to be covered by flood insurance because you live one block too far into the middle of the city and not close enough to the Mississippi River. So we do, our process really looks at where questions are coming from. So we're not we're interested, but we're not working in the model of answering questions that are driven by top-down levels, such as scientists. We're thinking about what's the question that's coming from the observation a community member has. What are the tools that are appropriate to gather that kind of data? Or does that data already exist, so we're not being, we're not duplicating? What is the best strategy for making that data as absolutely accessible as possible? And what are then the steps towards moving towards community-based goals and actions? And really, I think, a lot of the questions and what we've been talking about, the technology piece and the data piece, it's not the hard thing. It's, it's the easy part of all of this. It's the human relationships, it's trust building, it's creating bonds over years and years and years so that people can communicate with their city officials and can have interface with policymakers, that I think is really the most complicated part of what we do.
Yeah, so I would like to add something because we are building a sensor with 3 people here, including Maria. And this sensor was based on a spirometry, so a lung capacity test that you do in hospitals. So initially we were thinking about gathering data in the people's pocket. So you don't need to go to the hospital to do your lung capacity test. You can do it at home. You can do it even if you are not healed, to just see how it's going. But I think one important challenge is also not to focus on quantitative data. And what the team has been working on these days is also an interface where you don't see just a liter per second or an information that is just not very interesting, except if you're a physician, but something that is more visual, that is more attractive, and that is maybe more into arts. So an idea would be, for example, to have a curve of your lung capacity, and then you can try to design, in fact, the best curve in regard to the past evaluations you did. So really also thinking about how can we gather data. Maybe with this device we can have the flow, we can have the pressure, but we could also easily add the sensor for the air pollution or for the temperature, and then we can start to map the situation in countries where you don't have infrastructure, which is medical or else.
So for some of the projects that our teams at the port have been working on, we also thought about not gamification, but sonification. So, for example, sonification. So having, for example, an audio feedback instead of a visual feedback. So one team has designed a tool which can be used by physiotherapists to make certain exercises that gives you an audio feedback if you're doing the exercise correctly or not. And when we are talking about, for example, the humanitarian context, how you could use that is if you have a very remote village where your physician is maybe just in the capital and you're hundreds of kilometers far away and you have such a tool, you can do the exercise yourself, and getting the audio feedback gives you the idea if you're doing the exercise correctly or not. And I think it's not necessarily the matter of collecting data in terms of numbers, but having it in a kind of visual feedback or audio feedback or maybe even audio-visual feedback that someone who is not trained as a physician can analyze this data or can understand what the impact is. And I think this is very much playing into this. It's nice that we know that we have a lung capacity of 125 liters, but it would be nicer to have it visually to see that I increased by doing my exercises or by using this tool.
I guess we're all talkative about this subject. I think what we're ending up talking about is making data and technology relatable. One of the hardest locations that TDH is currently implementing a Fab Lab in is at an artisanal gold mining site in Burkina Faso. And one of the things we're doing is putting a normal workshop beside a Fab Lab, so you can see the links between the tools. So you can see what a saw is versus what like a digital cutter does. And you can make the link step by step. So I do think it's really important, the translation of technology to something that people understand. And I think it's the biggest thing we can do to make things different.
May I just add a few words? Thank you. Just maybe to link what has just been said about gaming and what your point was with the health issue when you're displaced and how do we have to deal with this. In fact, two links. The first, very clearly, playing helps. And I think we need to investigate the power of games on people's health and sort of mental health much more. There is very clearly a treasure trove to be rediscovered there. And it's not just by chance that some of the leading companies, typically in neurotech, nowadays use augmented reality, virtual reality, and gaming together to essentially speed up the capacity to regenerate, capacity to use your brain. And I think we have to extend this and really start getting much deeper into the power of playing on a wider field. Very interestingly, when it comes to mental health, when you're displaced, we spoke about food and shelter, but the ICRC guys tell me regularly that the first thing the displaced people ask for is Wi-Fi. Wi-Fi. So it seems to be part of what makes people feel better. They can communicate. They can relate to family or whatever. They can pass messages. It is increasingly important. But with Wi-Fi, with the communication channels, obviously, come dangers as well, challenges. And that's where I think Geneva organizations and the ICRC in particular are doing an amazing job thinking about what the responsibility to protect data flows is about. And there is a lot of thinking going on. And I should here sort of remind that more than 50% of digital governance worldwide is dealt with here in Geneva. Last but not least, communication. I would agree, decentralized is best. Certainly, as a Swiss, I couldn't say anything different. But I think we have to step up on this. In French, it very much goes after savoir-faire, the capacity to create content, and faire savoir, so you just flip the coin, the capacity to communicate it. And in my opinion, we are still putting a very, very heavy emphasis on the savoir-faire, on the content creation and substantial work. And we need to step up on, when it comes to communicating about this. I keep on saying savoir-faire, faire savoir. It should be like a Swiss fondue, 50-50 between Gruyère and Vacherin. So we have to essentially step the communication side to the level of the substantial value creation. I think the world needs to know better about that. Very interestingly, recently, the Geneva Internet Platform held a session about how International Geneva communicates. There was even an award distributed to the best mission, to the best NGO, and to the best international organization. What to me was really fascinating, hearing everybody in the room, was how much they were talking with each other, how much they were essentially sharing the best ideas. And this is exactly the sort of collaborative spirit we are trying to advocate. It's not about copying each other, it's not about coming up with one model, but it's about still sharing the best ideas, sharing the best practice, so that at the end of the day, everybody is getting better at it.
Thank you very much. Is there another question? No?
I have
Okay.
one.
Yes, where?
There.
You have one. Okay. Thomas, you have the floor.
Yeah, I'm an informed guy asking the question, but I do some research on cyber risks, nothing to do with what we have today, but I got to realize a couple of days ago that cyber risk is not only something technical, it's about ethics, it's about humanity, it's about philosophy, maybe theology. Someone was you, Serge, saying, "Oh, Geneva is the capital of so many things," but you forgot that it's also a capital of a religion that was created by Jean Calvin. And my question is, and I want to go back on Nicolas' welcome address. Say, hey, we need philosophers. We need people like that. And so I wonder, Geneva solution, is there also a Geneva spirit or Geneva philosophy that we shall develop, or sort of like continue nurturing?
So who wants to answer that? Go ahead.
Very shortly. I think Henri Dunant started the trend. Whenever there is technological disruption, or something sort of making human life more at risk, the Geneva networks step up, and it doesn't have necessarily to be government. It's just different spheres of Geneva coming together, innovating, and coming up with solutions. That's what I would call the Geneva spirit. It's where, since quite some time, we have regulated, we have created norms, but we now also have to create much more resilience, in my opinion. And we need to keep on sharing more. But this is essentially where technology has to meet humanity. It's been the case before. That's the heritage we have, but we once again need to step up in moving forward, because the challenges are huge.
Thank you. Ruta?
I think right now might be the moment that Geneva can make its principles or make its approach to the future. And I think that approach should be just as much about lifting up people who currently don't have access to stuff as about building something that's Geneva only. If I were to come back to a panel like this in 5 years or less, I would like to see displaced people on the stage rather than us. And I would like to see an equal number of initiatives that started from them.
Thank you very much. Is there another question? Yes, 2. Wow. Thomas, go this way. I have a question in the meantime. Just a question. How many people of you here are in the development sector? Lift your hand. 1, 2. Okay, 1/2. And humanitarian? Okay. And innovation like technology or science? Okay, so we have maybe here the people who could do everything you wish. Yes, your question, sir.
Okay, I'm Raymond Sanner from the Center for Socioeconomic Development, based here in Geneva. I'd like to come back to the analogy that Nicolas gave in his introductory speech, among many others. One was the well-known thing about, helping other people not to go and fish for them, but helping them to learn how to fish. That's certainly true and still holds. Here in Geneva, we should also add the third one. We have to allow them to go fishing. And by this, I mean access to markets. We have in Geneva the WTO. We have in Geneva the ILO. We have UNCTAD. These organizations don't necessarily talk to each other, even though they could provide solutions in the context of the SDGs, but they don't. So I think to some extent, we have to figure out a way how to find solutions beyond being good individuals. To want to do good is great, but there are certain things we need. We need to have a structural, at least to bring in structural considerations where the amount of individual do-gooders don't yet create enough momentum to change the structures that we have to at least discuss. And that's why the young are in the streets, because they're frustrated. They feel we just talk around things. But to make a structural change in addition to doing good takes a different angle. And in this regards, I think in Louisiana, because you were struck by so much terrible weather, people, I think, naturally looked for community solutions. In other countries or in other places like here in Geneva, we don't have, fortunately, we haven't been hit by such calamities or hurricanes. So what is your maybe experience that you could share with us, how to make community action, which is beyond individual doing good, how to make community action effective and sustainable? Thank you.
From the Louisiana perspective, I think I don't necessarily disagree with you. I think it's a bit more complicated than that, because our major economy is the oil and gas industry, which is largely responsible for how vulnerable we are to storm surge at this point, because of the dredging that they've been doing since the 1940s and 50s across the state. But still, a majority of the people that live in the southern areas of Louisiana are employed by that industry. So regardless if we've had major hurricanes, regardless if we have 1,000-year storms that are now happening once every other year. It's quite a bit more complicated than that. I think we face the dynamic of also having a lot of climate denial, climate change denial, and so our strategies are not just about how we bring communities together and get them right into monitoring, but sometimes the very first thing that we have to do, and I think this is a model for anywhere, is facilitated dialogue and thinking about how we can come together in spaces where we do not agree with each other, where we cannot come up with common linguistic forms to describe what we're all starting to experience and feel, and still be able to walk out of a space feeling like we can move forward together. And it's not easy. I mean, this is why I say I think the community piece of our work is one of the most complicated things. But I always feel like the beginning steps of dialogue are where we have to start. So I wish that I could say, here's the model for just getting a community together and going after these things, but I really don't have one.
From my perspective, I think it's also a question of leading by example. So when, for example, in our hackathon, we are tackling a waste challenge, and then we go for lunch, do we use plastic dish or do we use real dish? And I think if we would not take this seriously and saying, okay, we have a waste challenge where we really try to come up with solutions and crazy ideas around that, and then we throw away the plastic bottles and so on. We have to be a role model, and we have to lead by example. And I think this is for our community and the people that are working with us. They feel inspired by the fact that they see people that are like-minded, that have great ideas, that would like to do more, and they feel inspired by seeing that to do more themselves. And what I can see, we have now had more than 500 participants in different hackathons. When we call for action, we can reach out to those ambassadors, as we call them, and ask for their help, because we really have found friends and like-minded people who would like to drive the change. And I think this is also something that is way beyond the financing, but where even a personal doing good can help to inspire to do the change.
Thank you. For me, to build a community, I think the commons are a really good example. They have been existing for thousands of years. And we don't, maybe we see or we believe too often that companies are giving us work and that the state is important. But in fact, we are giving work to the companies. We are giving the collective intelligence. We are enabling them to use our natural resources. And I think if we just see, oh, what I can do on my own, what can I build with my neighbors that I can share, that others can do, then we can take ownership of our own capacities. And yeah, I think if we do innovation and if we share it with open licenses, if we document it well, if we spread the word, then we can build together and really be stronger than what's happening today with everyone building its own activity and protecting innovation that is not really helpful for the world.
Okay, yeah, I have a commentary in a way. It's basically the spirit of Geneva is something that has been around for, in a way, hundreds of years, and it was crystallized at the end of the last century or last millennium. It seems to me that what has happened is that entropy has entered into that whole spirit of Geneva. And I think that now the time has come for us to reassess by building on values, on ethics, on principles, so that there's a new vision of Geneva, of the spirit of Geneva. Because what we have heard here today, and if we look at the United Nations, if we look at these different things, 80% of the world's framework contracts are developed and evolve in Geneva. But where is the ethics in an exponentially growing world? And yeah, there's a new book that's out called Exponential Ethics, for example. And it's fascinating because like the nuclear power can be used for peaceful or war reasons, the same thing exists in every single new technology coming down the tube.
Thank you. There was a question. I don't think it's a question. It's like a remark, and we all agree, right? Then, Madam.
Hi. I was wondering if you were to fast forward like 5, 10 years, 15, and you would look at the more traditional humanitarian development organizations, do you see a role for them to have like all the innovations you're talking about, for them to come from within the company? So if you're talking about body bag and it came from a problem within a company, do you think they should be the ones who are coming up with these solutions, the way a Google has their own lab to come up with solutions? Or, you see energy companies and established car companies that they themselves are innovating. Do you see that also for this field?
Ines.
I think in the humanitarian world, the innovation can only be purpose-driven and not just inventing because it's fancy to innovate or to invent something new. So you always have to have a purpose and you have to have a meaning why there is a need for this tool. And I think this is what we with our events really show when we ask for ideas or problems that our teams can work on, especially we have a very good connection with Tadism. There is a huge amount of questions and ideas and proposals that we get. So, for example, what we don't do is we are not giving away prizes for the best team, because we say all our topics are equally important, that we can, at the end of the day, not judge what was the best team or what was the best solution or idea, because it's really helping someone in need to be better, to feel better, to have a problem solved. So I think this is really something especially for the humanitarian world, as I know them by talking to people, is it really has to have a purpose. And I'm not necessarily sure if, for example, Google or Facebook or whomever you pick are not creating a desire that you would not have without them.
I think I agree with you for centralized innovation. But I think I do realize I'm repeating myself often. But I think one of the places where humanitarian agencies can be very beneficial is to scale up innovations that displaced people, conflict-affected people are already doing. We have a habit of forgetting the fact that people are already doing stuff. Often before we get to people, they're putting in place mechanisms, they're building businesses, they're doing all kinds of stuff. One question for us is how to bring it to scale. So I think on the one hand, yeah, we need purpose-driven centralized innovation for problems that are big. And on the other hand, I think we need to find ways to find things that people are already doing and work and make them bigger.
I don't really agree with this idea of centralization because I feel there are lots of people that do innovation management and that do not really innovate and are not connected to their creativity. And I think that's a big challenge with all these consulting companies and others. I feel we really have to innovate for ourselves first and in our own organizations. And for me, one important point is really to create links with peers. So to see, okay, we have a challenge, or our manager or leader or teacher gives us a task to do. Okay, let's discuss together without the leader, without the teacher, to share solutions, to share our needs, and to see how we can come with one proposition that is interesting. And I think leaders, even CEOs, should also meet together to discuss how they can better decide together and be more ethical.
Thank you very much. A last question there.
Yes, it's a comment, because I don't understand why in Geneva, for example, we help people by giving them fish, and in other countries, developing countries, we help them fishing. And I know there's no answer, but I'm really sad today as I'm working with people on the welfare and people looking for money, for food. And I'm always surprised how we have all these great development projects helping people, helping themselves, and how in a very rich city like Geneva, we're not doing that with our poor people, and there are poor people in Geneva. It just saddens me. Thanks.
So is there anybody willing to answer that question? No. Okay, thank you very much. Thank you to all of you. Yes? Go ahead. Go ahead.
So when we invite people to join our hackathons, we ask them, regardless from where they travel, that they pay their own travel. What we give them is the accommodation for the 60 hours, and we provide them with food. And this means we have to work also with local caterers here. And there is an initiative that was basically built coming from the refugee crisis and out of this, and to bring people back to the market. And since 3 years, we are working with an initiative in Geneva, which is called the Cuisine Lab, where you have refugee chefs who are preparing their home dish and basically being proud of bringing their roots and their knowledge and their culture into our kitchen and into our stomachs ultimately. So I think there we try to also give something back to the local community in terms that we are promoting their business, that they have the means to expose them during our events, that the idea of having these kind of cuisine labs, not only in Geneva, but on other areas in Europe and beyond, I think this is something that we at least try to promote and to work on. So there is hope.
Yes. There is hope, and that's important for a panel called Geneva Solutions. All right, thank you very much, all of you. And now we go for a cocktail, right? And we hope that the glasses will be in glass and not in plastic, like here. Right? Okay, thank you very much. Thanks to you.